our Tuesday tea time. Having the effort that it takes to get us here at the same time, and the intention of bringing ourselves to our sitting cushion, chair, or seat, wherever we are. And having joy and kindness be part of our way of setting the stage for us to have enough effort to be interested in seeing what arises in the mind and in the heart, in our training of the heart and mind, so that we can see some of our reactions and responses more clearly. And for that ability, there is great appreciation for the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The understanding of waking up, the understanding of doing no harm, the understanding of the precepts, the teachings that the Buddha condensed. There were so many mind moments and so much awareness on his part, and he condensed it down for us to have the simplicity of the teachings, although they are not easy. But just arriving here together again as friends on the path. Appreciation of the Sangha. Our own and our householding experience, as well as the gratitude that we have for the nuns and monks so many hundreds and hundreds of years ago. To verbally pass along and then record in writing the teachings as they understood them. And so we sit with each other, and even if we were sitting alone, we have the container of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, dependent on ourselves and our own practice. We know that we have the support of others. In loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity, the understandings of the divine emotions to shelter us and help us see and hold ourselves and others in skillful thinking. And so we take this time to renounce some of our outside influences, to just sit together, letting go a little from time to time of our reactive and sometimes neurotic mind that grabs onto thoughts and carries us away for a while. And we have this ability to return to the breath, at the nostrils or at the lungs or the diaphragm, or a touch point at our sitting cushion or where our hands settle. Coming into the present moment as often as we can, using one of these as an anchor at first, or maybe the entire time. But we can lay a foundation of concentration by attending to a single object for a while, noticing when our attention wanders and coming back to that chosen breath or touch point. Noticing as we settle, gravity settles our body somewhere. We may do adjustments here and there, just noticing the intention that occurs in the mind before a movement occurs. We might notice the intention that arises at the beginning or the end of the breath, when we can no longer continue on that inhale or exhale. And then there's the intention to do the opposite at the beginning of the next part of the breath. When viewed with mindfulness and we are aware a little bit of our intentions, it gives us a little space between the next action, between the next reaching out toward satisfying a craving that arises. And as we continue harnessing our attention to come to that single object, we may notice that we're more likely to let go of those hindrances that arise. We return to the breath. Maybe sleepiness or tiredness is there, or maybe the restless mind is there, or grasping at something or pushing something away. For the sake of sort of building this safe container, we use this single object of the breath somewhere or the touch point to just keep returning to. Without judgment or any sort of criticism about what we should be doing, because there's nothing really to accomplish except to be present with mindfulness and awareness. This is where we may notice in our reminder of the Buddha's teachings on the Anapanasati Sutta, the attention on the breath at first, the first 4 of noticing whether the breath is long or short without manipulating it. Breathing in, we just know that it's a long breath or a short breath. We're with the breath as it arises. We may notice that space between the inhale and the exhale. And then we notice it exhale. Sometimes our breath is long, sometimes our breath is shorter. We're present with it. And what we might notice as we are aware of breathing coming in and out is that we can't grasp onto it. It's going to breathe of its own accord, coming and going. And we're just with it with mindfulness. If we grasp wanting the breath to be shorter or longer or smoother or not as smooth, we can see clearly the suffering that gets created in our minds as we grasp at something or push something away. So this is the direct experience of seeing clearly. Coming together and falling apart. Non-personal. It arises due to conditions that have come together and falls away due to conditions that are departing, disintegrating. We may notice that the breath is different now than it was when we started. Maybe it's shorter, maybe it's longer, maybe it's stronger, maybe it's not as strong. Maybe it's very subtle. Maybe it's smoother. This attending to the single object can help create a kind of protection of concentration. And if you're comfortable staying there, stay there. You can also open out the attention a little more to feeling the breath throughout the whole body. Or noticing with a larger field of attention. Still noticing one object at a time. But we have a more open field of awareness so that the objects are changing that we attend to. Whatever comes into the mind is fair game for mindfulness and awareness to be present. And the same things can be seen, attaching to it, pushing it away, can cause suffering. And we can see this directly. Direct experience without too much conversation about it. Not a lot of intellectualizing. We're just seeing clearly what's flowing constantly through the mind. Lots of things arising and passing away. Having this open awareness can allow us to have a little more spaciousness, to try to stay aware and mindful as different objects come into our awareness, from hearing or the thought door or tasting or touching at the seat or the hands. It's a broader awareness to the other senses, but it's the same activity, attending to what is in the forefront, connecting and sustaining our attention until it leaves of its own accord, showing us those three characteristics of anicca, anatta, and dukkha, that things come together, arise, and come together due to conditions. We're present with them. They leave on their own accord, non-personal. And having interest and just enough effort to see where mindfulness takes us, and allow awareness to be present, and allow wisdom to arise and be known, that we can let go of what might be unskillful repetition of something, and we can engage more in some of the skillful mind states of kindness to ourselves, compassion for ourselves and others. And so we want to keep an aliveness, an awareness of where we are in this present moment. What is happening in the heart and mind not right now? What is the attitude of the mind? We can sort of back up in our eightfold path of just skillful understanding, or having understanding of the Four Noble Truths each time we have some awareness of what's happening. Remembering to hold ourselves in gentleness and kindness. We have mindfulness and awareness present, and wisdom is arising as we keep some of those understandings of the Eightfold Path in mind. When, for example, we might be sitting and there's this pain in our leg or somewhere, and we may have noticed arising and passing away of the sensation, but if we become unhappy about the pain, or sometimes the unhappiness might make the pain worse, and we sort of lost our mindfulness. We weren't quite as skillful. We didn't just see it coming and going. And so now we're sort of stuck, and we can overcome the suffering caused by pain by employing part of the Eightfold Path. It's not all in a particular order. And so simply becoming mindful of the pain and our resistance to it, we can make use of skillful mindfulness. And we can become aware that this is suffering. And we can see the truth about the suffering. That's the first noble truth. And it becomes real to us, and we can work with skillful understanding, that first step on the path. And then as we're using mindfulness, we might notice that the more we resist what's happening, the pain, the worse it might feel. And then we notice making some effort to overcome our aversion. And that involves skillful effort. And we can let go of aversion by relaxing and by cultivating a friendly attitude of kindness. We might realize that the pain is worthy of loving friendliness, as any other bodily sensation. And so then that sort of develops the aspect of skillful thinking that we've been talking about lately. So all of these steps come in different orders during our sitting practice, and during our walking practice, and during our alive, awake, and aware in everyday life practice. It's like a kitchen where all the pots and pans are hanging according to size, and all the utensils might be neatly arranged in an order, but we grab whatever spoon or pot we need at the moment. And so that's how the 8 steps get incorporated into our daily life, selecting and using what step is needed. And we've been looking at the first and second steps of letting go, understanding the right view, and letting go, and having loving kindness and compassion. But we know the others are there in the background. All of this going on moment by moment, keeping our interest and our energy. And as we notice letting go of ill will and harshness and hold ourselves in kindness, at this point in our practice of this time period, we can gently set aside the investigation of what's going on and let our attention flow toward loving kindness, toward compassion. Being not too tight and not too loose. Having goodwill and kindness for ourselves. Avoiding extremes. Approaching all of our experience with basic friendliness and respect. Having that inner smile of waking up to the present moment with kindness. Without this kindness, mindfulness meditation is very hard to center upon. And so holding ourselves in gentleness, having a sense of being happy and healthy, having a sense of being free from suffering. Letting go of negative states of mind and creating a space in our mind for cultivating positive thoughts. Letting go of angry or hostile thoughts. And cultivating loving friendliness. This metta is a natural capacity of our hearts and minds. May these feelings of goodwill permeate our beings as we encourage kindness and goodwill to ourselves and to others. Teachers, benefactors, friends. Letting these feelings of goodwill that we generate in our hearts include others that we don't know. Others who may be around us in our neighborhoods, or those that we saw recently that we don't know. Wishing in gladness. That these beings too be free from harm and safe and protected and have happiness. Letting these thoughts of kindness include those who are in suffering. Those who are in joy. Those in sorrow. Those enlightened and those unenlightened. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May all beings be released from all suffering. May they not be parted from the good fortune that they've attained during this lifetime. Knowing that as we act upon intention, we are the owners of our own action, inheriting the results. That our actions with intentions, whether they're skillful or harmful, we are the heirs of our actions. And so we continue with non-harming to ourselves and others as best we can. living the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, keeping it alive in our lives. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya domino upakitava meruchanti te sam vipassamo sukho. All conditioned things are subject to impermanence. They arise and pass away. And seeing this clearly with mindfulness brings the greatest happiness, which is peace. May we recognize that peace when we have it. May we continue with right intention. May we remember that the goodness of our practice benefits all sentient beings. And so for a few minutes while we're still in this meditative mind state, whatever you need to do to drink water or adjust your posture, I'm just going to remind us a little bit of that we started with the Eightfold Path, and that now we're into the second one of right thought, that includes all the intentions and aspirations that lead to wholesome actions, and those are the result. They result in the welfare and happiness of ourselves and of others. And so, if you recall, there are thoughts of renunciation, letting go of sense desires, thoughts of goodwill, of loving kindness, loving friendliness, free from ill will. And the last in these three positive thoughts that the Buddha directed us in is compassion, freedom from cruelty. And there's the dichotomy of skillful and unskillful, and that seems very clear, that there's cruelty that wishes to cause harm to people, and it's the disposition to give unnecessary pain and suffering. Cruelty is a feeling of extreme heartlessness, and it's a feeling of extreme manifestation of a mind state in many situations that, as we can see obviously, and it's been for centuries, but violence and throughout the world. And we can see the manifestations of this mind state in quality of cruelty that almost seems contagious with the whole population. And there's lots going on, but it's gone on for a long time, from Cambodia and Rwanda and other places around the world from quite a long time ago that we can recall. And there's a kind of heartlessness of actions in this many native cultures, and the violence of slavery, and it's this kind of targeted cruelty that can happen with homophobia and violence against women, and it's so extensive and far-reaching. And compassion is the antidote to this difficult situation that sometimes I think we can be in the thick of even noticing ourselves that we're being harmful to ourselves in something that we're doing, and it could be very subtle. And compassion is the strong wish of the mind and the heart to alleviate suffering, and we have to cultivate that, to open our hearts to the suffering that is there, and sometimes sort of overcome our indifference. It opens our hearts to the suffering that is there, and it's strong and can be a deep feeling that allows us to move into action sometimes. Thich Nhat Hanh said, compassion is a verb. And it's this very feeling that motivated the Buddha on his journey to Buddhahood. And in our times, the Dalai Lama has inspired, exemplary state of mind. Compassion and love are precious things in life. They're not complicated. They're simple, but difficult to practice. And so it's worth investigating why a beautiful and wholesome state is so difficult to practice. And a careful examination can sometimes reveal even small and unnoticed moments of cruelty within ourselves. And compassion arises out of our willingness to come close to the suffering. The problem is that even though we may want to be compassionate, and sometimes we are, it's not always easy to open to the suffering that's present. And just as there are many times that we don't want to acknowledge and open to our pain, we don't necessarily want to be with the pain of others either. There are strong tendencies in the mind that keep us defended, withdrawn and indifferent sometimes, or even apathetic in the face of suffering. And this indifference is often acknowledged, and it's a barrier to a compassionate response. There's an experiment, where we can watch our mind the next time we approach a situation of suffering. It might be some pain in the body, or some unworthiness, or maybe it's jealousy or loneliness or discontent or fear, or there's so many, or a situation of suffering in the world. Racial injustice, politics, religious violence, natural disasters. But what happens as we face these situations? Either in person or, through something vivid images in the media. Do we feel uneasy? Do we withdraw? Do we numb ourselves? Do we let it in? And the question for us is, how can our hearts stay open given the magnitude of the suffering that exists in the world? Is it even possible to open to it all with compassion and diminishing the subtlety, the cruelty or the indifference? And this isn't a theoretical challenge. It's not to be looked at from afar. It requires openness and equanimity, and it requires learning to let things in without drowning in the difficulties and without being overcome by sorrow. It means learning to simply be with the truth of the way things are. And it's the great gift of mindfulness that opens us to compassion. Being with the truth of what is present is what we do every time we open to our own pain or difficulty. And we practice opening and coming close to the suffering in our own lives with compassion. And we have greater strength and courage to be with the suffering of others that way. That, there's an empathy in the beginning of compassion. And empathy happens when we take a moment to stop and feel what's really going on with another person before we rush on with our lives. And this is its own practice, because many times we might be cognizant of another person's pain, but we don't take the time, even a few moments, to come close to it, to really open to it. I have a couple of examples, since I was in Seattle over the weekend, and noticing a couple of things, both on a personal level, because I was with my partner who was very agitated and anxious about driving. And I noticed a lot of suffering involved, both me, because I didn't like being the recipient of what was carrying on for him, so obviously being distressed in traffic, which I completely understood. So I needed to invoke some empathy on how it was for him. But at first I didn't really want to do that, because I was feeling my own discomfort, my own resentment, my own, feelings almost of like abuse, because all of this energy was coming at me that I needed to find a way to manage both my own reaction to it and invoke some kind of kindness and compassion for the state of this other being that was, undergoing much more distress and much more reactive about it. And the same thing sort of happened when we were rushing down this busy street to cross the street, and there was a guy sitting on a corner, sitting on a walker, and he had a sign, that said, "Please help." And I think he said he was a veteran. And instead of just walking by, I just looked over at him and stopped for a minute, and I decided that I would have empathy for this being. And I looked in my wallet, I pulled out a $5 bill, I looked him in the eyes, and I gave it to him. And he was so grateful. And he thanked me so much. And he asked me my name, and I told him my name, and I asked him his name, and he told me his name. And of course, he was very appreciative and thanked me a lot. And as we crossed the street, he yelled back at me. He said, "Bye, Candle. Have a good afternoon." And it was so sweet. And it just took a moment of me getting out of my own way of whatever I thought was important and having kindness for someone who is in a challenging situation. It's easier to have empathy for in a situation like that, in a way, because it's somebody you don't know and you know that they're suffering. It's a little harder when you have the direct thing happening right in front of you, when, in the case of the driving situation, it took a lot more management on my part to not be reactive right away. Well, I was reactive inside my mind, but I, withheld my reaction verbally. I closed down for a while I tried to manage how to have kindness for myself, to let go of the renunciation of the thoughts that were unskillful for me, either in how I was reacting to all of that or what I might have said to him. And so by thinking about that second path, it comes into mind of letting go, renunciation, letting go of the unskillful, and then allowing the thoughts to go toward kindness for myself, and then eventually with a kind of kindness and empathy for him, and letting kindness and compassion for the situation, you know, to really become available to me even while my mind was, you know, so sort of closing down and my heart was closing down. But, you know, practicing openness in different kinds of situations is the only way that I think empathy can arise. And we have to have, that's why loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, they're just all together. We learn them sort of in a line, but they're all together in a circle because it takes equanimity to have compassion when things are really, really so challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So,
could I mention something, Kendall?
Yeah.